Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Check Service Industry Podcast. I am Reyshan Parker, and if you haven't yet, please go watch my television series Beyond the Check Worker Owner Edition, now streaming on Amazon Prime and Tubi TV. Tubi TV, it's free TV. Also, if you like to check out some really cool live things like a behind the scenes cooking show, you should go follow us on Tastemade at Beyond the Check, because we're going to be doing that. I have a fantastic guest today. She does all kinds of stuff. We're going to have a whole lot of fun. She's a tarot reader. She's a storyteller. She spent 15 years on Broadway as a publicist and a consultant. She does a fun thing like writing the Playbill's Broadway Horoscopes. And she's worked on more than 20 Broadway shows, and a lot of them have won some Tony Awards. So she's all about... I think she likes food. We're going to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, Emily McGill.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
I love food. I love
That's
food.
good. I also have a fondness for the stuff. What's your favorite food?
It's not in my bio, but I have worked at restaurants, and I've it depends on my mood, but as soon as you asked, I was like, yeah, I want to go to a steakhouse. So
my wife would be happy to join you.
Yes. Great. Excellent.
I want to go to Chinese. I don't know why.
Excellent.
It's all tasty. You can have steak at a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah, you can. Some really good steak too.
Mm-hmm. Japanese, even better.
Yep.
So we got a lot to cover here.
Right.
So you're currently a spiritualist and a tarot reader. But you worked on Broadway hanging out with like lots of famous, cool actors and then decided to be a tarot. Tell me your story.
Yeah. So I grew up in Pittsburgh. I always loved the arts, and, I started dancing school when I was very young, found the theater when I was in junior high. And always had this like singular ambition to move to New York to work on Broadway. Like that was always what I knew I wanted to do with my life. And for a long time, I only knew you could do that as an actor. I didn't know there were other options. So I didn't realize that you had an entire industry of people doing marketing, advertising, publicity, management, accountants, lawyers. I mean, it all exists, right?
It's everybody.
It's an industry. But you don't
is.
think about that when you're sitting in a theater. All you see are the people on stage in front of you, and then you're like, oh yeah, and there's somebody like moving the scenery, right? So you have like your actors and you have your crew, and there's so much more to it. So I knew that I wanted to be on the business side of the business, but I didn't really know what that meant or how to get there. And my undergrad is in performing. I have a BA in theater. So I moved to New York and just started auditioning. I did that for a year, even though I knew I didn't want to do that professionally. And then I started
just to meet people?
Well, because I knew that it was something that I had always thought I wanted, and I had to at least go after it and like really put an effort towards it. But I also did a lot of self-sabotage where I didn't think I deserved the part or the role or the spot or whatever. So it would always be me and the other person at the final callbacks, and the other person would get the job every time.
Every time.
And I knew that it was not what I wanted to be doing.
But you were so close every time.
Yeah, but I was so close every time.
Right.
Never landed it.
That's just crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, to be the next, a lot of people would kill to be the second, because it just means you're getting closer.
Sure, but then you don't get the job.
Right. But you at least know that people do think that you were worthy. It's just
absolutely
the one other person happened to be slightly better, right?
But also, it was not my path. That was not my journey. That's not what I was supposed to be doing with myself. And I was supposed to be learning about the business side of the business, and what is it that, what's a gross, what's a net, what do all of these like random groups of letters mean when you're talking about all the different
they didn't
unions.
teach you that in theater school?
I mean, they didn't even teach us how to audition in theater school. You know, they gave us scenes and said, like, do this scene, but didn't say, like, okay, so if this happened at an audition, this is what you would do. You know, that's not how it worked.
Yeah, school never really covers the actual real world necessities.
No.
Like across the board, from high school all the way up, like, you know, in film school, we're not taught like how to actually go finance a movie.
Exactly.
You know? And without the money, there is no movie. So like we can talk about how to do it all day long, but until you teach us how to go out into the real world and really accomplish those things, you know, without just, it's funny that you said that, because like nobody sits and watches a movie or sits in a play and it's like, oh my God, you know what I want to do? Accounting for movies. Right. It's like, that's a real job, but it is like everything that exists in the real world exists, you know, in entertainment.
It's so true. And I knew that there was a world there. You know, I had gotten a glimpse into it, but I wanted to learn more. And so I started interning at a bunch of different places and working at restaurants while I was doing that. You know, I worked at Del Frisco's here in New York for like a year and a half as a hostess, and like, you know, would run the door when they needed me to, and had a blast with that. That place is like an airplane hangar, and trying to figure out the puzzle of fitting all of the bodies into that space on a Saturday night when everybody's bringing in their wives and their kids and their girlfriends, and they're not there on their expense accounts. Like, it was crazy.
And people think hosting's just some menial job. Just take people to their tables.
And
there's a lot of organization.
But I enjoyed the puzzle. Like, that was so fun for me, was trying to figure out, like, how are we going to seat this 12 top and like these 18 two tops that are all coming in at the same time, right? Like, how are we going to make this work? So that was like, that was a fun puzzle, but it was also clear that if I stayed at that restaurant, I was not going to be doing, like, I wasn't going to be putting myself into the kind of roles that I wanted to be doing in these theater jobs. Right. And so when I left the restaurant, that's when I started working full time in theater. You know, the internships, yes, but was able to
turn it into a paid gig.
Yeah, a year after I had left the restaurant, I had, you know, my first sort of office job where I was an employee with a salary in a way that I hadn't had before.
You were a big girl.
You know, my first big girl job. I was 25, and I felt like I was starting late, you know, at 25. Everybody's like starting like straight out of college, 22 years old. And here I am, like, having been interning. But that's the thing. Like, that was my journey. I needed to have the extra time to sort of learn these different roles and figure out where I wanted to fit in. And when I happened to land in a PR office, I was like, oh yeah, this is right. I love this.
Promotion.
Well, I loved the creativity behind it. I loved the communications part of it. I loved to connect with people and communicate and share ideas and thoughts and beliefs and, you know, have conversations like we're having now. I also loved getting to work with, like you mentioned, some really awesome people, you know, people who I had either grown up listening to on cast albums, and then all of a sudden, or watching on TV or whatever it was. And then all of a sudden I'm like texting them to make sure that they got in the car to meet me at wherever we're going. Right. So there's a little bit of that disconnect too. But it was a really, really fun experience for me. And after about 4 years working on Broadway shows, I ended up going to a more traditional PR agency and being their in-house Broadway expert. Nice. Once I did that, I realized I hate PR. And I spent 3.5 years there before, you know, and I was doing the thing that I knew how to do. And so when I left there, I started my own business doing the thing that I knew how to do, which was PR. But also not realizing how much I actually hated it. I thought it was just the stuff I was working on at this job, rather than it was the fact that I was like doing this thing.
So what would be like the day in and day out of PRing?
Well, it's really different depending on what you're working on. But with things like I was doing, there's a lot of like gathering the right contacts in the media that you're going to be sending a pitch to, writing your pitches, getting those out, doing your strategy around, who we want to talk to, why we want to talk to, what our timeline looks like. There could be a lot of event planning and event execution happening, red carpets and photo lines and press lines, product
scheduling,
lots of detail orientation, lots of logistics, lots of operations in that sense, and like human operations, right? Like if you're doing a film campaign and you're doing a press visit to New York with all of your actors, you have to schedule the press day. I mean, it's wild, and there are aspects to that are fun for me. The puzzle of putting that stuff together, but stalking the media to get a response is not one of the things that I enjoy spending my time doing.
It's one of my least favorite things to do.
Right, and so I think that there is something in the telling of stories, in
next to social
strategizing
media.
of stories.
Social media also sucks.
Yeah, these are not fun ways to spend our time, But this idea of storytelling and of gathering that is in the theater, I love so much. And so there's a component of that and I would say like in communications, I love helping people figure out how to tell their stories, helping people, figure out what's their headline. I'm actually, like you said, segueing out of my the career that I've built for the last 15 years, and I'm actually headed to grad school at Columbia University.
Are you really?
Yes, and the program is called Spirituality Mind Body Institute.
At Columbia?
It's a teacher's college at Columbia University, and it's all about the science of spirituality.
Really? I did not know they held that program.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's the first Ivy League program of its kind. And, it's just, I'm so excited to really try something new because.
You're going to have to let me know how that goes. Yeah. I'm super curious. Like, what do you,
Thanks.
Like, it's just like Ivy League yoga and
wouldn't that be nice? No, not at all.
And The Secret, right?
I mean, no, it's like, it's full blown, like, the head of the
mind, body, and spirit
program, the woman who founded the program, Dr. Lisa Miller, has a book called The Awakened Brain, and it's all about how they've done all of these studies on the human brain and how different brains of people who have spirituality in their life and consider that a high priority and a really important part of their life, and then folks who have like medium to low priority of spirituality, the brain cortex is actually thicker and stronger, which helps against things like depression and some of the psychological cycles that we can get into that help that cause mental health challenges in some people. And granted, a lot of people, a lot of mental health challenges can be chemical and trauma induced. There are so many ways that can be created, but that in these studies where people who either have been prone to depression because of hereditary and genetic and ancestral lifestyle factors, and experiences, and factors, and people who haven't, when they have done these studies, they've literally seen that the brain cortex, it exists, the physical experience of it.
I mean, that makes sense because spirituality is one of the 9 necessities to live in a blue zone. You know what the blue zones are?
I do not.
So the blue zones are the places on Earth where people tend to live to a high age. Right. So like Okinawa and
Italy,
all those places. Mm-hmm. And the reason there's 9 factors that they found that keep them living that long. Right. And spirituality is one of those, like having a belief in something, friends and family. A lot of them fall, like 4 of them fall basically in the same category, which is just your basic social structures.
Connection. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there's really something so fascinating in the fact that spirituality, connection to your higher self, your own higher power, your own relationship. It's not religion. It's not within the structures and the traditions that have been passed down generationally. And sometimes it is, in many indigenous cultures, there is a spirituality practice that is, passed down that way. But
can you tell the difference when you're operating on your lower self, or when you're fully operating as your higher self through yourself? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean, exactly what you mean. And I would say that I have become more aware of when I am operating from lower self, because I do much less of it now. I have been in therapy for almost a decade, and my therapist is actually who introduced me to tarot. And she has a really beautiful style and like way of being and treating people. And, she practices something called core energetics, where a lot of the belief is that we hold the trauma of our lives in energy within our body. And so moving energy allows us to access that and process it. And there's all kinds. Yeah, exactly. Really, truly, like let the tears come, let the tantrum happen, because I've learned for myself, if I choke down the emotion part, I get so clouded that I can't see what to do next. Whereas if I allow myself to have the full emotional expression that I need to have in any given moment, to the extent that it, of course, is safe for myself and everyone around me, right?
Or and appropriate.
But I have to have that full emotional expression to then have the clarity to be like, okay, now what are we going to do about this?
Right.
You know,
you have to process.
Mm-hmm.
There's the steps that you have to take in any in any emotional situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's from death. I mean, death's, I guess, a pretty basic one to follow, the stair steps of anger, grief, But when we fall in love, we have an opposite thing, right? We have excitement. We have this like desire to be with them all the time. And then eventually that wears off, and you have to approach the reality of the situation. Like, are we really compatible, or was that just a whole lot of fun for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
And then make your decision from there, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, did you spend a lot of time in the green rooms on Broadway? Or were you just more behind the scenes all the time?
Yeah, I just spent a lot of time in green rooms with people.
Cool.
Usually
what are we
at
eating?
Events and stuff.
What was the food like in the green rooms in Broadway?
Well,
I really want to know.
So in the theaters, that's not really a thing, unless like, some shows, like I think at Billy Elliot, they used to do Sunday morning breakfast, where like people would like, potluck and everybody would bring something. It would sort of do a thing like that. But what we used to do when I was working on Memphis the Musical, on Saturday nights, we used to have Snob Saturday night on Broadway, and we would drink in the men's dressing room after the show. And
just so the men's dressing room?
Yes, because they had this big, long dressing room that had a door that led out to a fire escape between the Schubert Theater and the Broadhurst Theater. So
and you could smoke out there.
It was this hidden spot where you could smoke and hang out. In the summer, they had hammocks out there. We called it the bungalow, whole setup. So
cool.
we would, and it was always somebody's responsibility to bring a drink. So I would show up with 2 bottles of Prosecco no matter what when I was going. But somebody in the cast was mixing a cocktail for everybody too. So there was less, in the way of food in the theaters like that. People ordering their dinner between shows to get delivered to the stage door and things like that. But we didn't do as much eating in the building together. I will say that, like, every
you would think, like,
with
like rehearsals, and you'd be spending so much time in the building, like that they would have catering that would just be there. And they don't.
But unlike theater, unlike film and television, theater does not necessarily feed you. No. At a meet and greet day, first rehearsal, you might find a little breakfast spread and coffee, but it's not something that you get used to and get to experience on the regular. No, if I was taking a client to an appearance somewhere, that's where I spent a lot of time in green rooms, right? At TV studios and interviews.
And there's food
and, like,
there.
Sometimes it's just coffee and water, though. I will say, like, you go to NBC,
depending on the play, you go to NBC, there's a spread.
Yeah, you go to 30 Rock, you're going to get a spread. You go to Colbert, you're going to have a nice spread.
You go to the local news station, not so much. I get it.
You're going to have a cup of coffee.
You go to the radio station, you're lucky if you get the cup of coffee.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Still, I am shocked that the Broadway is not feeding people more. Even the stagehands, like, those people got to eat. They need candy.
Yes, I'm sure that there are plenty of folks that have, the candy gets passed around for sure. Some door people, I think, like keep a bag of it right at the door for folks and stuff too. But
I know the lighting guys really need to eat. So.
Yeah. All those IATSE guys, they work there. Well, folks, right? Because we have across the board. I mean. There's so many more women now also represented in that industry.
Because like the film unions, like if you don't feed them, you're in trouble.
It's the same. It's the same sort of like. It's some of the unions are the same. Some of the carpenters, some of the electricians, some of the props guys, some of the the folks that are doing all of the automation, things like that, like. Folks that work on Broadway and in the theater and live entertainment are oftentimes also doing that on film and TV sets too. So there is a lot of crossover there, but the unions do have, very, very strong regulations and rules, and they do a very good job of protecting their members. But one of the ways that I think that, Broadway sort of tries to keep those budgets down as much as possible within that
is the food.
Yeah. You can order your lunch. We're not going to feed you.
Do they pay for it?
No, not at all. What? I mean, and now I will say if I had an actor who was doing a TV appearance and we were taking them to, go do a new show or whatever the thing is, they have to do a thing and then we're going to the theater, I would buy their dinner and bill it back to the show. Right. If we were doing a publicity thing where it was like, hey, we've got, the cast is going to do this thing, like we're going to order their food and make sure they can eat before they go to work. Yes. In those cases, yes, we take care of it. But not just like, oh, you have a 4-hour rehearsal today and 2 8-hour rehearsals over the next 2 days. Like, get your own food.
I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I never knew that. I can't believe I did not know that. Anyway. Come on, Broadway. You got enough money. Feed your people.
There's not a lot of money in the theater. Despite what it looks like.
I mean... In the smaller theaters or Broadway itself just walks
in general, I mean, it's really expensive to put on a Broadway show, but a lot of that money goes towards advertising and salaries. Like the single largest line item you're going to have on your budget of a show is salaries across the board, period. And your theater rent, which is like, can be hundreds of thousands of dollars a week, depending on which theaters you're in. And what those sort of deals are with the landlords and the theater owners.
It's a good way to get a paycheck for several months.
It can be, yeah, if you're lucky enough to get a job on a show that's running and anyway, stays running.
Well, I can see why you left since they don't feed you. All right, so back to your story. You decided you've started learning how to do tarot. And how did that go?
It's been awesome. Like I said, my therapist introduced me to the practice. When I first started seeing her and I didn't know what to do with something, if I didn't know what direction I wanted to go, or if I had a this or that decision to make, or even multiple different options or opportunities ahead of me, she would say, why don't we pull a card? And, just casually like kind of grab a deck from her shelf and shuffle and let me pull one, and we would talk about it. And it was something we did often enough that it was just kind of like something we'd do. And
was this then your first introduction into tarot and stuff?
I had a pretty typical, I would say, like 90s upbringing of pop culture understanding of this is like that very like late 90s, early aughts, they're all, everyone was worried about devil worshiping and all of this stuff in high schools across the country. And like, tarot getting looped into all of these sort of alternative ways of living. See,
my mom's a Wiccan. I was raised by hippies. We had tarot cards. Animal cards are her favorite. She loves the animal cards. So like, do you know which ones I'm talking about? Like the Indian ones? And, Yeah, all kinds of different tarot cards. So many different decks of tarot cards in my house.
So I grew up Catholic, and so there was so much fear around it, right? Like and there's a story that I didn't know until years later when I started actually reading tarot and was telling my mom about it. She told me that the night her dad died, they had been playing with a tarot deck. And my aunt was like, what are you doing? Get rid of that. And then like later that night, my grandfather passed away. He had a heart attack. And that was in the 70s. I didn't ever know him. That was long before I was even here.
Oh my God, she blamed the tarot deck?
They didn't blame the deck, but there was this correlation of this fear, of this thing, of this not understanding. And so it was wild to me just, to just kind of have this become part of my life kind of authentically and naturally, and have nothing, not have any knowledge of that experience in what was so seminal in her life. Right. And then last Christmas, just before the holidays, an aunt by affection. She is not a blood relative, but her mother and my grandmother were friends from the time they were 12 years old. So she's my Aunt Heidi. She'd moved to Germany with her husband and was in New York just visiting. And I was like, oh, I have something for you. And I opened this package, and it was her mom's vintage tarot deck from the 70s.
Whoa.
And I burst into tears in the middle of a bar in Times Square. I was like, what? This is the best gift I've ever gotten in my life. I was so moved. I loved it so much. I love it. I use it every day, my Aunt Ginny's tarot deck. But, I just thought it was also so wild that was like something that had been waiting for me for 50 years.
Wow. Yeah.
In somebody else's possession.
Because they couldn't give it to you yet.
But it didn't mean anything to come to me before that time, right? Like if it had come to me any earlier than that, it wouldn't have held the same meaning.
Like, cool, I got a tarot deck.
Right. But now it's like, oh my God, Aunt Ginny's tarot, like this is amazing. And so I feel like I've done a good job sort of in the reprogramming of other people around me who may have had a certain belief about tarot, and helping them sort of see that it's not anything bad or negative. I personally look at it as a form of self-communication, like a tool to communicate with yourself, with your intuition, with your core, your gut, your heart, whatever you want to call it.
When you're confused, you pull the card, you read a little, and it just kind of puts everything straight.
Yeah, well, it tells you at your core, it helps give you language and a way to communicate what, like a feeling or an essence that but you can't really name. So I always like to say, it's like a visual or a physical representation of information you hold within yourself. So it's like if you text yourself a meme, right? You're like, this is what I'm trying to say to you, self. This is where I'm at. And
listen.
So, yeah.
That's a good idea. Maybe I should start texting myself the stuff I'm yelling at myself about.
Listen,
I've never thought to do that.
If it weren't for emailing myself, I wouldn't get anything done. Because if something comes into my head and I don't email it to myself, it doesn't get added to the to-do list.
See, I try to keep it in notes, like I have my notes in my phone, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't always remember to do that either. Right.
Right. And sometimes it's notes, and sometimes it's my journal, and sometimes it's my work notebook with my to-do list in there, right? Like there are several different places, but this idea, I like the idea of like setting myself up for success. And for me, part of that is, tapping in, like, what's a theme? I pull a card every day. So it's like, what's the theme for today? Or like, how is this resonating or not resonating? Because sometimes it doesn't resonate. And it's like, okay, well, where could this be fitting in? Or maybe it's something that I'm not thinking about, or maybe it's something that's coming 2 or 3 days from now. I don't know.
Right. Until it happens. It's like the dream you forgot that you walk into, and you're like, oh my God.
And then you're like, deja vu. I've been here before.
That's what that was.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, do you have your aunt's tarot cards?
not that deck, but I do have a Rider-Waite-Smith deck here with me.
Ooh, fancy.
Which is
I don't know what that means.
Rider-Waite-Smith is like kind of like the OG tarot deck that you're probably used to seeing if you're looking at an older deck. Yep, classic. So it was drawn by Pamela Coleman Smith and Arthur Waite, who was the sort of like, it was his brainchild to put the deck together, really only gave her direction for the major arcana. So tarot has two parts to the deck, for those not familiar, the major arcana and the minor arcana. Arcana just really means like part or section. And the major arcana are like our magic cards. So when they show up, we pay special attention to them. There are 22, and they correspond to the human soul's evolutionary journey. So we start with the Fool, 0, the numberless number, trusting everything, stepping out fresh onto this journey, very naive, very trusting. And we go all the way up through the World, which is our healed energy, wholeness. And so we have the major arcana. The minor arcana is kind of like a deck of playing cards. And Pamela Coleman Smith was given free reign to do whatever she wanted with those. Arthur Waite didn't really care what she did. And so she created all of these beautiful cards with all of this awesome symbolism that have been used. Yeah. Well, the cup, the swords, the pentacles, and the wands were already in existence. Our 4 suits, which also correspond to our 4 elements, right? So our wands are our fire. That's our passion, our drive, our creativity, ideas, the stuff that lights us up, that gets us out of bed. Our our water is our cups. So that's your feelings, your emotions, your intuition. Swords are our air element. So that is anything having to do with the mind. So between wisdom, knowledge, education, language, communication, technology, anything that sort of has to do in that airy kind of world. And then we have our coins or discs or pentacles, which is our earth. So that's physical, material, manifest. And so most decks that now you'll see on the market that are an intuitive deck or a deck that is full of cards with only pictures on them and don't look like a deck of playing cards where it's like there are 2 cups on it for the 2 of cups. Those cards are almost always inspired by Pamela Coleman Smith's creation. So I love this deck for that purpose, that it's sort of like the mother of modern tarot in so many ways.
and then a lot of just other types of tarot decks, like the animal cards, like I mentioned before. And there's a kitchen deck. My mom has a kitchen deck. That just, it's all related to the kitchen somehow. The pots, the pans. I love it.
And there are different kinds of decks too. You'll find that, like, you know, people will often ask me, what's the difference between a tarot deck and an oracle deck? And the biggest difference is the structure, right? So the tarot deck is always going to have the major arcana and minor arcana. And that minor arcana has 4 court cards and then ace through 10. So we'll have a king and a queen, a knight and a page. And that 56 cards of the minor arcana is always going to be there. That 22 cards of the major arcana is always going to be there. Sometimes you'll have an additional 23rd card in the major arcana that is the author's card that they've created for themselves. So you'll sometimes find that. But in an oracle deck, you don't have that structure. So there's so much more freedom for the creator of the deck to make it whatever they want it to be. So you're not necessarily going to find there's 78 cards or 79, right? You're going to see maybe there's 20 cards, or maybe it's just a major arcana, or maybe it's 50 cards, or, you know, there are so many different ways that an oracle deck can be created. So that's kind of like the big difference between that.
Good to know.
Yeah.
So would you say that an oracle deck is a more broad deck?
Not necessarily. I think an oracle deck is more really from the intention and the brainchild of the person creating it.
But they'd probably, like, how do you make a tarot deck? How do you sit down and you're like...
Well, okay. I'm in the process of that, actually. I'm writing my own Broadway tarot deck.
You need to take the influence from the traditional tarot, and you also need to keep the structure somewhat usable, right? To create readings and different structures of readings, right?
Well, basically what I'm doing is I'm taking the archetypes, because tarot is all archetypes, right? We look at Jung's archetypes, they're all over the place. And we see those everywhere in storytelling and in story. And so when we see these cards as archetypes, we can then see correlating characters that correspond to those archetypes across the theater canon. So for example, if I'm talking about someone who is listening to their intuition, really knows at their core, like what is right for themselves, is not going to be swayed by other people's opinions.
Oh my God, is it the director's card?
Knows that they have, they know what is right and they're going to follow what is right for them to do. And that's the high priestess, if we're talking about it in the tarot, right? We're talking about this idea of like sense of self, of intuition, of knowing at your core, like this is what I'm going to follow. But we could also be talking about Elphaba from Wicked. Like literally, it's the same thing. And she also happens to be a witch. So like, there's that part too. But we see this whole thing where you're like, oh, that character aligns with that archetype.
Like it would be really easy to go make a Disney tarot deck. It's basically what you're saying.
I mean, I don't know about easy, but
I mean, you have the cast of characters to pull from is fully available to match the requirements of a tarot deck.
Yeah. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been casting and writing.
Cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to give these cards one more shuffle. And if you're ready.
All right.
And we could do a reading for you. We could do this for your listeners, like a general reading for anybody who's listening. It's up to you. Let's do well, real quick before we do that. Have you seen Stranger Things new season yet? I don't watch it. Oh, you'd really like it. It's basically, since you haven't seen it, they're not going to. They do the same thing, and I think they've done the same thing with Dungeons and Dragons, right? Where Dungeons and Dragons was a thing that's killing kids in the 80s, right? Like, everyone's so scared of it, just like Tarot and everything else, and Ouija boards. Like, I think they all kind of fell under the same spell of the 80s and 90s. Yeah. But they're breaking it, right? They just make fun of it. Like, they just straight make fun of how stupid it was for people to, like, really think that this crazy people playing Dungeons and Dragons were crazy occult people who were murdering and, like... Right. It was basically reefer madness for the occult for the occult esoteric. Yeah, it was ridiculous. But we've come full circle now, so if you get bored, you might really like Stranger Things. I'm just saying. Right. Okay. Let's do an average general reading. Let's just do a general reading. Let's throw out some cards and see what sticks. Great. Okay. So I'm gonna have you cut these cards. Okay. So you're gonna tell me when to stop flipping through. All right, I'll tell you when to stop. Stop. So I feel like I'm trying to decide which spread we're doing. Okay, I feel like we're going to do a yes and a no. So I don't know what that's going to mean for anyone who's listening. I also want to invite you to say, I want to say as an invitation to you that take what resonates and leave the rest. It might not all be for you. It might all be for you. But just note what resonates for you and tap into that. Copy that. Cool. So for our yes card, we have our 3 of Wands. 3 of Wands, upside down. Yes. And so remember our wands, that's our fire. That's our passion, our drive, our creativity, the things that light us up, that get us out of bed. And the 3 is towards the beginning of an ace through 10 cycle, right? As a deck of playing cards, we have ace through 10. Mm-hmm. Then we get into our court cards. And so the 3 is like, we're starting to create the foundations that we need for the things that light us up, that we want to go after in life. And yes, you said it. This card's upside down. So there's a thing in tarot called reversals. Some people like to read them. Some people don't. Mm-hmm. The people that do like to read them, like myself, there are different ways you can. A lot of people will say it's like the negative expression or the bad expression of a card. I disagree with that because I think every card holds the full spectrum of its meaning. But this one some ways I like to read in reversals are also that it's the internal expression of the card. So it's something that rather than being how you're facing the world, it's your relationship with yourself and something that's going on internally for you. Sometimes it's something that needs to be dropped. So I would say in this, it's probably about saying yes to the structures that are going to help you set yourself up for success, that are going to best support you in following whatever it is that lights you up every morning.
Spot on.
Like you have to say yes to creating the right foundations for those structures, or you're not going to be able to sustain when things get big.
Cool.
And that's the yes that I'm getting.
I like it.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense, actually.
Mm-hmm. So that's resonating for you.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
I mean, I'm currently just stuck in like this unmotivated funk, right? Where I wake up every morning with all the plans to do all the things, and I just don't do any of them. I just can't seem to motivate myself to do them, right? It's forced. I have to force myself to do anything, and I don't know why. Right. So
more
structure.
Inviting, inviting ways, like inviting creativity for structure too, right? Like the wands are creative, very creative suit. So it's not like it has to look like structure in the sense of like a parking garage, right? Like structure can also be bamboo. Like I always think when I start to think of structure, I try and think of like the bamboo scaffolding that they use in Asia. They don't use metal and wood the way we do in the States. They don't use concrete. They use bamboo because it's flexible and strong. And so this idea that like the foundation and the structure doesn't have to be rigid, but it does have to exist.
Right. Makes sense.
There's something.
All right, everyone out there, get your structures together. Make a plan. Make a plan. Make a fun plan.
Yes. Right.
Make a fun plan to get it done.
Because our no card is the Page of Pentacles. And our Pentacles are our earth. So that's our physical, our material, our manifest. And the Page is the first card in that court card cycle, right? Page, Knight, Queen, King. And the Page is very young energy. It very much kind of mirrors the Fool. And it's fresh, it's new, it's naive. There's definitely a childlike essence to the Page. And I think that's what this is saying is like, you can't be childish and childlike with your resources. Like the no that this card is representing is like, you can't always like run to mom and dad to fix your resource problems. It doesn't work that way anymore. And so.
Or time is not infinite for you.
Right. It's a resource, right? They're resources. And so we can't be irresponsible with our resources because that's not going to help us with whatever we're moving towards.
Hear that, world? Hear that, America?
Right. You could say that goes for so many.
China, Australia, the whole world.
Right? But also, how interesting to look at these. Nope, this way, right? Nope, I was right the first time. I get so confused with the mirror.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why that has to mirror either.
But, we can see actually these two cards together, there's so much sort of reflection between the two of them. Like the Page could, in theory, grow up to be that figure, and they could be one and the same. That figure that's got the red cloak around him with the green, right? Like that could be, they look like they're one and the same character as we're looking at this.
Just one's a little older, maybe a little wiser.
Yeah, I think so.
Super interesting.
Isn't that wild?
Don't waste your time. Get your shit together and get out there and do some things. That's what I got.
Great. I love it.
I mean, the simpler the better, right? So I feel like until you're taking all of these words and these metaphors and these things, like if you're reading the book along with it anyway, and not having someone like read it for
Interpret.
you, right? Interpret it. Then you literally have to interpret it yourself. And I think finding like a one sentence thing to take away usually helps.
Yeah,
me.
absolutely. And, we could say, yes, creating the structures that are going to support you are your best path forward.
To then help you manage your resources so that you don't waste time or resources.
So that the resources are used intentionally and responsibly.
Bravo.
Yeah.
To go with our Broadway theme. Bravo.
I'll curtsy. Thank you.
Take a bow. Thank you so much for the reading.
Oh my God, my pleasure.
Everyone, thank Emily. Thank you, Emily. They're very thankful.
If I could demystify tarot for one person, I've done my job. If one person is like, oh, that doesn't sound evil.
Do people still think that? I mean, I guess I'm sure there are.
There's still a lot of
evangelicals and
but not even that, just like general people in the world who are like the occult, the esoteric, like not interested. Nope, that doesn't sound cool.
I think for regular people, I think generally speaking, it's just more of just like a weird novelty that like, yeah, whatever. Right? It's nothing scary. It's nothing.
It's a party trick.
It's just a party trick. Yeah, for the most part. But like, it's the belief that the now is important, and when those cards come out, because it was meant to be, right? So it's almost a fatalistic experience, because this card, you can't change the card, you can't change the moment, you can't change your decisions. Once something happens, that is fate, and it's locked in, right? So and it's
a different reading. If we had started that reading 5 minutes later, we would have had a different reading, right? Like it's
but maybe same. Not.
No, but we would have, because it, I mean, subatomic particles are only affected based on if they've been perceived or not, right? Like our perceiving in all of these senses of like
Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. When we perceive something, we change the direction of the existence of whatever it is, right? Like just by simply witnessing, we affect it.
If a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to does it make a sound? Actually, it doesn't. I mean, for the birds,
it makes sound waves.
It makes sound waves. But again, if there's not a conscious entity there to view it, then is it even happening?
And yet, like, also the earth itself is a conscious entity.
So do we count that?
Right.
Yeah.
And we could just go on and on and on and on into the universe, you know?
They're all, somebody's watching, okay? Somebody out there saw that tree fall.
Yeah.
And they heard it. Anyway, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Would you like to give any shout outs? Where can we go follow you? Where should we go follow you? Where will we get this tarot deck in the future?
Yeah, so you can learn more about me. I hang out mostly on my own website on the internet, EmilyMcGillEntertainment.com. And if you're interested in a reading, there's a 25% off discount there that you can find on my tarot page if you want to sign up for a reading. And I also have a weekly tarot email that I do for a weekly card pull for anyone who's interested in that. And then I'm on Instagram at Emily Ann MCG, Emily Ann ANNE MCG. I'm less on Instagram these days, but
I'm slacking there.
It ebbs and flows
myself, but it does. So sometimes you're just like all in, and it takes up all of your time, and then you're just like, you burn yourself out, and you're like, I can't even touch Instagram for like a month.
I'm reposting this and this and this and this and this all in my stories. I'm like, yes, I love that. I love that. I love that. And then I'm like, no,
I'm over it.
Yeah.
Too much screen time. Need real life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's very true.
Touché. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was super awesome. Thank you for the reading. I can't wait. You have to come back after you get to college and tell me all about Columbia and the spiritual program, because I'm super interested in hearing about the process, how it's going, and all that stuff. So we will check back in later and find out. Thank you again so much for being here, and keep up the good work. And I believe that your path is wide open.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Emily McGill, go check out her website. Go sign up for some readings. I'm sure we can get a lot more in-depth about your own personal readings if you reach out to her. And she's a lovely, fantastic woman. Again, Emily McGill.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, go watch my TV show.